Clorn had been trying to sell the Theta-9 facility for 6 standard cycles. 6 cycles of prospective buyers taking one look at the hazard documentation and immediately developing sudden urgent business elsewhere in the galaxy. He couldn't blame them. The place was a certified nightmare wrapped in a radioactive bow. The property listing read like a horror novel. Former military weapons testing site. Atmospheric toxicity index of 7.3. Soil contamination levels that would make a waste disposal expert weep. And the plant life. Oh, the plant life. Mutated beyond recognition into things that had more in common with nightmares than botany. The Galactic Safety Council had slapped a Level 9 hazard classification on it, which was 1 level below just nuke it from orbit. But Clorn had bills to pay, and a commission structure that meant he absolutely could not afford another failed quarter. So when his holographic display pinged with a new inquiry, he practically lunged at it. The human's message was brief. Saw your listing for Theta-9. Still available? Budget is tight, but I'm very interested. Jake Torres. A human. Clorn's 3 eye stalks perked up simultaneously. Humans were new to the galactic scene, and rumor had it they were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Sometimes both. Either way, they had a reputation for buying property other species wouldn't touch with a decontamination pole. Clorn fired back a response within seconds. Absolutely available. When would you like to schedule a viewing? 2 days later, Jake Torres stepped off the transport shuttle, and Clorn's first thought was that this human looked disappointingly normal. Medium height, dark hair pulled back in what humans called a bun, wearing cargo pants and a faded shirt that said Plant Dad in Earth script. He carried a backpack that looked older than some of Clorn's commission checks and had the unsettling demeanor of someone who was genuinely excited to be there. Mr. Torres. Clorn extended a tentacle for the human handshake he'd been practicing. Welcome to Theta-9. I must inform you, as per Galactic Property Law Section 472, that this facility carries significant health and safety warnings. Jake's fine, the human said, grinning as he shook Clorn's tentacle with alarming enthusiasm. And yeah, I read the documentation. Honestly, it sounds perfect for what I need. Perfect. The human had read a report that made seasoned soldiers refuse deployment and thought it sounded perfect. Clorn's commission sensors were tingling. Wonderful, Clorn said, his voice modulator perhaps a bit too eager. Shall we begin the tour? I should mention the facility comes with a fully operational perimeter fence, 12 security drones, and a decontamination chamber that only sometimes causes third-degree burns. Jake was already walking toward the entrance, peering at the twisted vegetation that had grown through cracks in the outer walls. Are those Baruvian thorn vines? I thought those went extinct. They did, Clorn said flatly. Then the weapons testing brought them back, and made them worse. Much worse. They now produce a neurotoxin that can liquefy most organic nervous systems in under 40 seconds. Incredible, Jake breathed, pulling out a battered datapad and snapping photos. The adaptive mutation rate must be off the charts. What's the asking price again? Clorn named a figure that was frankly insulting for a facility this size, even with the whole deadly contamination situation. Jake didn't even blink. Does that include the security drones? Yes. And the decontamination chamber? Also yes. What about utility hookups? I'll need water and power for irrigation systems. Clorn stared at the human. Irrigation systems. This creature was standing at the gates of a certified death zone and asking about irrigation systems like he was shopping for a suburban greenhouse. Either humans were the bravest species in the galaxy, or they were too stupid to recognize danger when it was actively trying to kill them. Clorn was really hoping for option 2, because option 2 meant a commission, and commission meant he could finally afford that vacation to the resort moons of Palax 7. Utility hookups are included, Clorn said, pulling up the facility schematics on his datapad. Though I should warn you, the water filtration system may require some repairs after the last incident. What incident? The one where the filtration system gained sentience and tried to flood the entire compound. Jake Torres looked at Clorn like he'd just described a minor plumbing issue. So basically, Jake said slowly, you're telling me I can get 12 acres of mutated xenobotanical specimens, existing infrastructure, and security systems for the price of a studio apartment in New Tokyo? Well, when you put it that way, I'll take it, Jake said. When can I move in? Clorn's eye stalks nearly fell off. Clorn had sold property to some questionable buyers before. A methane breather who wanted to convert a luxury hotel into a swamp. A hive mind colony that purchased an entire moon just to argue with itself. Once, memorably, a sentient gas cloud that bought a penthouse and then forgot why. But he had never, in his entire career, encountered someone who responded to mortal danger with genuine enthusiasm. Before we finalize anything, Clorn said, leading Jake through the outer checkpoint, galactic law requires I give you the full safety briefing and facility tour. Most buyers don't make it past the first zone. Most buyers leave. Most buyers run screaming. There's a difference. The checkpoint scanner beeped angrily as they passed through, flashing red warnings about detected human biosignatures entering a level 9 zone. Jake ignored it completely, too busy examining a cluster of purple fungi growing on the security wall. Are those bioluminescent? Jake asked, leaning closer. Yes, and they're also releasing spores that can cause respiratory paralysis, temporary blindness, and an overwhelming urge to confess your darkest secrets to nearby strangers. Please don't touch them. Jake was already taking notes. Fantastic. I've been looking for natural light sources for the greenhouse sections. What's their spore release cycle? Clorn decided he needed to try a different approach. Perhaps if he showed the human the really dangerous areas, survival instinct would finally kick in. Let's proceed to Zone 3, Clorn said, guiding Jake past a series of warning holograms that were basically screaming "Turn back now" in 47 different languages. This is where the Dravakian military conducted their biological growth accelerant tests. They rounded a corner, and Zone 3 sprawled before them in all its horrifying glory. What had once been a standard testing ground was now a writhing mass of vegetation that seemed to actively hate the concept of existence. Vines, thick as transport cables coiled around rusted equipment. Flowers the size of hovercars bloomed in colors that didn't exist in nature and probably violated several laws of physics. In the center of it all, a massive tree-like structure pulsed with sickly green energy, its branches moving despite the complete absence of wind. One of Clorn's security drones floated ahead to scan the area. A vine lashed out faster than Clorn's eyes could track and swallowed the drone whole. There was a brief mechanical screaming sound, then silence. That, Clorn said, happens roughly 3 times per day. We've lost 42 drones in the last standard month. I'm legally required to inform you that the facility's plant life is demonstrably hostile and has a 98% fatality rate for organic beings. Jake had his data pad out and was practically vibrating with excitement. Did that vine just use a hunting strategy? That was an ambush predator technique. Do you have documentation on its behavior? Patterns. I have documentation on the 17 people it's killed. Even better. That'll help me understand its territorial range. Jake started walking toward the death vine like it was a friendly neighbor's dog. Clorn's remaining security drones immediately began broadcasting distress signals. One of them actually fled the area entirely, which Clorn hadn't programmed them to do because he'd never imagined a scenario where his own security systems would develop self-preservation instincts. Mr. Torres, Jake, please step back from the carnivorous vegetation, Clorn said, his voice modulator cracking slightly with what might have been panic. Jake stopped about 10 feet from the vine, which had started making a noise somewhere between a hiss and a growl. Does it respond to auditory stimuli? It responds to everything by trying to kill it. Right, but does it distinguish between different sounds? Jake pulled out a small device and played a series of tones. The vine's movements changed, becoming almost curious, rather than immediately murderous. Clorn watched in mounting horror as the human appeared to be attempting communication with a plant that had been classified as a weapon of mass destruction. Fascinating, Jake murmured. It's responding to lower frequencies. That suggests a sophisticated root system that can detect vibrations. You know what this means? That we should leave immediately and never return. It means these plants have developed complex sensory adaptations that could revolutionize our understanding of xenobotanical intelligence. Jake turned to Clorn with a smile that could only be described as deranged. This is incredible. What else you got? Clorn pulled up his facility map with a tentacle that was definitely trembling. Zone 5 contains the radiation gardens where they tested bioweapon dispersal methods. The soil glows in the dark, and the ambient radiation would kill most species in under an hour. How's the drainage? The drainage? Yeah, for the soil. Radioactive or not, you can't grow anything in standing water. Clorn stared at Jake Torres for a long moment, trying to process the fact that this human was treating a military-grade contamination zone like a potential vegetable garden. The drainage is adequate, Clorn said faintly, though several of the plants have developed the ability to move independently and have been observed coordinating group attacks on anything that enters the zone. Pack hunting behavior in plants, Jake said, making more notes. This just keeps getting better. Can we see Zone 5 now? I really must advise against. A shriek split the air, high-pitched and mechanical. Clorn's last security drone was backing away from something in the undergrowth, its threat sensors maxed out. Jake walked toward the sound. "That's the wrong direction," Clorn called out. "You're supposed to run away from the screaming. But I want to see what's making that noise." Jake disappeared into fix, a cluster of thorn bushes that immediately closed behind him like a living door. Clorn stood alone in Zone 3, contemplating his life choices and wondering if commission was really worth this level of stress. Then Jake's voice floated back through the vegetation, cheerful and completely unconcerned. "Hey, Clorn, what's the square footage on the eastern section? I'm thinking I could set up a propagation lab over here." Clorn's eye stalks drooped in defeat. He was definitely going to need that vacation. Jake Torres signed the property transfer documents with the kind of enthusiasm most species reserved for winning the galactic lottery. Clorn watched him scrawl his signature across the data pad, already mentally spending his commission on that resort vacation, and tried very hard not to think about the inevitable incident report he'd be filing within the next 48 hours. "Congratulations on your new property," Clorn said, his voice modulator set to maximum professionalism to hide the guilt. "As per standard procedure, I'm required to provide you with emergency contact information, evacuation protocols, and the location of the nearest medical facility capable of treating exotic toxin exposure." "Great," Jake said, not looking up from his own datapad where he was sketching what appeared to be garden layouts. "Can you send those to my comm? I want to start moving in today." "Today?" Clorn's eye stalks wilted. "You want to move into the active hazard zone today. No point waiting around. I've got 3 months before the growing season peaks, and I need to get soil samples processed before then." Jake shouldered his ancient backpack. "Oh, and I'll need to set up some basic infrastructure. Do the HAB units still have power?" "The main facility does, yes. Though I should mention that the AI system sometimes speaks in tongues, and the climate controls have been known to randomly switch between Arctic freeze and volcanic heat. Sounds like the apartment I had, grad school. I'll manage." Clorn transmitted the final documents, collected his commission transfer, and told himself firmly that what happened next was not his problem. He was a real estate agent, not a babysitter. If this human wanted to live in a death trap, that was his own business. He made it about 3 hours before the guilt overwhelmed him. Clorn filed the incident report with the Galactic Safety Council at 14 Standard Time, fully expecting it to be a death notification by morning. The report was brief. "Human buyer has taken possession of Theta 9 facility. Estimated survival time, less than 1 standard day. Please have cleanup crew on standby." What Clorn didn't expect was the response that came back 30 minutes later. "Observer dispatched. Pip will arrive within 2 hours to document the situation for case files. Do not interfere with observation protocol." An observer. The Safety Council was sending someone to watch Jake die and take notes about it. Clorn felt his internal organs twist with something that might have been conscience. Pip arrived at Theta 9 in a standard-issue Safety Council shuttle, clutching a documentation kit and trying very hard not to vibrate with anxiety. Pip was a Chirixian, which meant he looked like someone had crossed a beetle with a nervous breakdown and given it a clipboard. His species had evolved as archive keepers and record maintainers, which made them perfect for observation duty and terrible at handling stress. This assignment was definitely going to be stressful. "Human buyer, Jake Torres. Human male, Earth origin," Pip muttered to himself, reviewing the file as he approached the facility entrance. "Species classification, recently discovered, reckless, apparently immune to common sense. Predicted survival time in level 9 hazard zone, 4 to 6 hours maximum." The entrance gate was already open. Pip's antennae quivered with alarm. Inside the perimeter, he found signs of habitation that made his documentation training kick into overdrive. A small tent had been erected near the main facility building, the kind of flimsy shelter humans apparently used for recreational outdoor survival. Next to it sat several bags of something labeled organic fertilizer and a crate of equipment that looked disturbingly well used. And music. Someone was playing music. Pip followed the sound deeper into the complex, his camera drone hovering nervously behind him. The music was coming from Zone 3, which, according to the facility records, was home to the carnivorous vine collective that had a documented taste for living flesh. He found Jake Torres sitting cross-legged on the ground about 15 feet from the largest vine cluster, a portable speaker playing what Pip's translator identified as classic earth rock at moderate volume. The human was transplanting something from a small pot into the contaminated soil, humming along to the music. The vines were swaying, not attacking, swaying, like they were listening. Pip's documentation reflexes took over. He activated his recording equipment with trembling appendages and began speaking in a hushed tone. Hour 4 of human habitation. Subject appears to be engaging in agricultural activity within Zone 3. Ambient threat level. Extreme. Human threat awareness. Non-existent. Pip paused. Subject is now talking to the hostile plant life, requesting psychological evaluation protocols. Hey there, Jake was saying to a vine that had definitely killed 3 people last month. I'm just going to plant this little guy nearby. You don't mind, right? He's a nitrogen fixer, so he'll actually help the soil quality. Everybody wins. The vine made a gurgling sound that Pip's translator couldn't process. Yeah, I thought you'd be cool with it, Jake continued, patting the soil down around his new plant. I'm thinking we establish some ground rules, though. No eating the research equipment, no strangling the irrigation lines, and maybe try not to terrify the other scientists when they visit. Deal? The vine extended a smaller tendril and gently, almost carefully, touched the newly planted seedling. Pip's camera drone captured everything while Pip himself tried to remember his emergency breathing exercises. Hour 4, addendum, Pip whispered into his recorder. Human has apparently negotiated a treaty with the carnivorous vegetation. This should not be possible. This is not possible. Requesting immediate backup and possibly sedatives for the observer. That's me. I need the sedatives. Jake stood up, brushed the radioactive soil off his pants like it was regular dirt, and finally noticed Pip standing there. Oh hey, Jake said cheerfully. You're not with the property management, are you? Because I already signed all the paperwork. Pip, Galactic Safety Council, Observer Corps, Pip managed to squeak out. I'm here to document your occupancy of the facility. Cool. Want to help me set up the tang? Composting system? I'm thinking I can use some of the native vegetation as biomass, but I need to test the toxicity levels first. You want to make compost? From the toxic plants? Well, yeah, waste not, want not, right? Jake picked up a sample bag. Most of these mutations are just adaptations to the contaminated environment. Strip away the scary parts and you've got some really robust genetic material to work with. Pip stared at the human. His entire species had spent millennia perfecting the art of careful observation and detailed record-keeping. Nothing in his training had prepared him for this. I should inform you, Pip said weakly, that I'm required to maintain observation distance and not interfere with the natural progression of events. Sure, no problem. Just stay clear of the western section. There's something over there that keeps screaming at me and I haven't figured out if it's territorial or just rude. Jake wandered off toward his tent, leaving Pip alone with his not the five, malfunctioning worldview and a vine that was now definitely looking at him with what could only be described as curiosity. Pip activated his emergency comm link to the Safety Council. This is Observer Pip requesting extended assignment duration, he said, watching Jake set up what appeared to be a portable laboratory next to a cluster of plants that glowed ominously in the fading light. Initial survival estimate may have been overly optimistic. I mean pessimistic. I have no idea what's happening anymore and I need to document all of it. Back in his office, Clorn received a notification that his incident report had been upgraded to a long-term observation case. He looked at his commission statement, looked at the notification, and decided he was definitely taking that vacation immediately. Whatever was about to happen at Theta 9, he did not want to be anywhere nearby when it did. Pip's official observation log, Day 7. Subject Jake Torres continues to defy all established models of survival behavior in hazardous environments. This morning I watched him greet every plant in Zone 3 by name. He has named them. The carnivorous vine collective is apparently called Gerald. All of them. Collectively, I have filed 3 requests for psychological support and received 0 responses. The reality was somehow worse than Pip's logs conveyed. Jake had settled into Theta 9 like it was a countryside cottage instead of a former military installation where 17 different war crimes had been committed against botany. He'd established what he called a morning routine that involved checking on the most dangerous specimens first, usually while drinking something he referred to as coffee from a chipped mug that said, Universe's okayest botanist. Pip watched from his designated observation post, a reinforced shelter he'd set up at the edge of Zone 3, as Jake approached Gerald with a watering can. Morning, guys, Jake said cheerfully to the Rin, vine collective that had killed a trained military demolitions team. Looking a bit droopy today. Let's get you some water and maybe some phosphorus supplements. Gerald, the collective carnivorous death vine, leaned into the water stream like a cat getting scratched behind the ears. This is not scientifically possible, Pip muttered into his recorder. Plant behavioral modification of this magnitude should require years of careful conditioning. Subject has been in residence for 1 standard week. Current theory: human is some form of botanical wizard. Alternative theory: observer has gone insane and is hallucinating all of this. Hey Pip, Jake called out. Want to see something cool? Every instinct in Pip's body screamed no. His mouth said, I suppose that falls within my observation duties. Jake led him deeper into Zone 3, past clusters of vegetation that Pip's threat scanner identified with increasingly alarmed beeping sounds. They stopped in front of a patch of flowers that glowed with sickly yellow bioluminescence. These are Thorian death blossoms, Jake said, kneeling beside them with the kind of casual confidence that suggested either bravery or catastrophic head trauma. According to the facility records, they produce an airborne neurotoxin that causes aggressive hallucinations, followed by respiratory failure. Yes, Pip said, his recording equipment capturing every moment of what he assumed would be his final minutes. That is accurate. We should leave immediately. Except watch this. Jake pulled out his portable speaker and played a specific sequence of tones, low-frequency pulses that Pip felt in his exoskeleton. The death blossom's glow shifted from yellow to soft blue. I've been working with them all week. The neurotoxin production is actually a stress response. When they're calm, they're basically harmless. Harmless, Pip repeated flatly. Well, relatively harmless. Don't eat them or anything. Jake gently touched one of the petals. It didn't immediately kill him, which Pip noted was a significant deviation from established death blossom behavior patterns. I think someone could actually cultivate these as a sustainable light source for colony settlements. You know, after we breed out the whole murder toxin thing. Pip's antennae twitched rapidly, his species equivalent of hysterical laughter. You've been here for 7 days and you're already planning commercial applications for military-grade bioweapons. I mean, that's kind of the whole point, right? Jake stood up, brushing off his knees. This whole facility is basically a library of aggressive plant adaptations. It's not a death zone, it's a research goldmine. People just weren't asking the right questions. The right question being what, exactly? Have you tried being nice to them? Pip stared at Jake Torres for a long moment, trying to process the implications of that statement. Decades of military testing, billions of credits in weapons development, 17 documented fatalities, and the solution was being nice to them. I need to file a report, Pip said weakly. Cool. I'm going to check on Screamer. Want to come? Who or what is Screamer? The thing in the western section that keeps yelling. I think it's lonely. Pip decided he did not want to come and returned to his observation post to file what he privately thought of as his sanity questioning report to the Safety Council. Day 14 brought new developments that made Pip question his entire understanding of xenobotany. Jake had moved beyond simple plant care into what could only be described as environmental rehabilitation on a scale that should have required a team of specialists and approximately 10 years. Instead, it was one human with a watering can, a bag of fertilizer, and an apparently unshakable belief that everything could be fixed with the right pH balance. The radiation levels in Zone 5 had dropped by 18%. Jake had introduced a series of what he called hyperaccumulator plants that apparently absorbed radioactive isotopes from the soil. Where he'd obtained plants capable of surviving and thriving in a radiation garden, Pip didn't know and was afraid to ask. Day 14 observation log, Pip recorded, watching Jake set up an irrigation system that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and sheer determination. Ambient toxicity levels continue to decrease. Subject has established thriving plant colonies in Zones 3, 5, and 7. Zone 7 was previously classified as uninhabitable due to atmospheric acid content. Subject's response to this information was, and I quote, "Yeah, but the drainage is fantastic." Gerald the Vine Collective had expanded their territory but were now carefully avoiding Jake's living quarters and research areas. Pip had documented what appeared to be the vines actively protecting Jake's equipment from smaller predatory plants. The death blossoms were blooming in the live, organized patterns that Jake insisted were actually kind of pretty once you get to know them. Screamer, which turned out to be a massive fungal network that communicated through subsonic wailing, had apparently bonded with Jake after he'd spent 3 days adjusting the humidity levels in its zone. It now only screamed at threats, which currently included Pip's observation drones and occasionally Pip himself. "This is impossible," Pip muttered, reviewing his footage. Behavioral modification of this scale, environmental remediation showing measurable results, establishment of what can only be described as symbiotic relationships with hostile xenoflora. None of this should be happening. His comm unit pinged. Message from Clorn, the real estate agent. How's the human? Dead yet? Please say yes. The guilt is killing me. Pip typed back slowly. Human thriving. Property value likely increased by 300%. Send help. Possibly mental health counselors. For me, not the human. The human is fine. The human is always fine. I don't understand anything anymore. Day 21 marked the arrival of Jake's first visitors. Pip watched from his post as a small transport shuttle landed near the facility entrance. 3 figures emerged. 2 appeared to be xenobotanists based on their equipment, and the third was definitely a journalist based on the recording gear and the expression of someone hunting for a story. Jake greeted them at the entrance like he was hosting a garden party and not giving a tour of a former weapons testing facility. Welcome to Theta 9, Jake's voice carried across the compound. Watch your step. Some of the paths are still a bit unstable. Also, if anything screams at you, that's just Screamer saying hello. Don't take it personally. Pip activated all his recording equipment. This was either going to be a fascinating addition to his case file or the moment everything went catastrophically wrong. The journalist, a Venlari with the kind of skeptical expression that suggested she'd seen it all, spoke first. Mr. Torres, our viewers are fascinated by reports that you're living in what was classified as one of the most dangerous locations in the sector. How have you survived this long? Oh, it's not that dangerous once you understand the ecosystem, Jake said, leading them toward Zone 3. Most of these plants are just defensive. They're not actually aggressive unless you threaten them or, try to weaponize them. They rounded the corner and came face to face with Gerald. The 2 xenobotanists froze. The journalist's recording equipment shook slightly. Gerald swayed gently, almost greeting-like. Gerald, we've got guests, Jake said casually. Be cool. One of the massive vines extended slowly, carefully, and gently touched Jake's shoulder before retreating. Did that? One of the xenobotanists whispered. Did that classified biological weapon just pat you? Gerald's very affectionate once you get to know them. Them? It? I'm still working out the pronoun situation for a collective organism. Jake gestured for the group to follow. Come on. I want to show you the Death Blossom colony. I've been working on isolating the luminescent properties from the neurotoxin production. Pip watched the tour group follow Jake deeper into the facility, their expressions cycling between terror, confusion, and reluctant fascination. He added a new note to his observation log. Day 21. Subject has begun hosting tours. The universe makes no sense. I have accepted this. Request vacation time immediately upon conclusion of observation duty. His comm pinged again. Another message from Clorn. The property value did what? Pip smiled slightly. His first moment of genuine amusement since arriving at Theta 9. At least someone was having a worse time processing all this than he was. Pip's official observation log, Day 42. I no longer know what I'm observing. Is this still a hazard? Documentation case? A survival study? A psychological evaluation of human risk assessment capabilities? This morning, Subject Torres held a lecture on companion planting techniques for 3 visiting xenobotanists while standing in what used to be the facility's most contaminated sector. The soil there now supports 17 different plant species, none of which are currently trying to kill anyone. My supervisor asked if I was filing reports while intoxicated. I wish I was. The transformation of Theta 9 had accelerated beyond anything Pip could have predicted. What had started as one human's baffling refusal to die had somehow evolved into something that looked suspiciously like success. Zone 3 was now what Jake called the demonstration garden. Gerald and the other vine collectives had been actually trained, to grow along designated trellises that Jake had constructed from salvaged facility materials. The area that had once been a no-go zone of botanical carnage now resembled a slightly aggressive botanical garden, where the plants occasionally hissed at visitors but rarely attempted murder. Zone 5, the radiation garden, had become Jake's pride and joy. The ambient radiation levels had dropped to 42% of their original measurements. Jake had introduced a succession of hyperaccumulator species that formed what he described as a living filtration system that was actively decontaminating the soil. Its basic phytoremediation, Jake had explained to a group of visiting environmental scientists, who stared at him like he'd just explained that he'd solved the radiation problem by asking it politely to leave. These plants absorb heavy metals and radioactive isotopes, concentrate them in their tissues, then you harvest and properly dispose of the plant matter. We're basically using photosynthesis to clean up a military disaster. One of the scientists had pointed out that this process typically took decades. Jake had shrugged and said something about optimal growing conditions and aggressive fertilization schedules. Pip was fairly certain the real answer was that human beings were somehow capable of bullying physics into cooperation through sheer, stubborn optimism, but he couldn't exactly put that in an official report. Zone 7, the acid atmosphere zone, had been converted into what Jake called an extreme environment research station. He'd introduced species that thrived in low pH conditions and created a microclimate that was slowly, somehow, neutralizing the atmospheric acidity. Screamer lived there now, having fully bonded with Jake after he'd installed a misting system that kept the fungal network at optimal humidity. Screamer no longer screamed at Jake. It screamed at everything else as a form of protection, which Jake interpreted as guard dog behavior, and Pip interpreted as ongoing psychological trauma. The facility's property value had indeed skyrocketed. Clorn had sent Pip 17 messages, each one more panicked than the last, asking for documentation that could be used for marketing purposes. Apparently, every real estate agent in the sector now wanted to know how Clorn had successfully sold a level 9 hazard zone. Pip's response had been simple: find a human, preferably one with a botany degree and a complete disregard for personal safety. Day 56 brought what Pip could only describe as the incident that broke his brain entirely. A delegation from the Galactic Agricultural Commission had arrived to investigate reports of impossible botanical developments at Theta 9. They were serious people, the kind who wore official badges and carried certification documents, and definitely did not expect to find what they found. Jake met them at the entrance, wearing a shirt that said, "Talk dirt to me," and holding a basket of what appeared to be vegetables. "Welcome to Theta 9 Research Station," Jake said, somehow having upgraded the facility's name without telling anyone. "I hope you're hungry, because I've been testing edible crop viability in the remediated zones, and I've got way too many tomatoes." The delegation leader, a stern Qualrian named Commissioner Velt, stared at the basket. "You're growing food, in a former weapons testing facility. Food that you expect people to eat. Well, not from the hot zones, obviously, but the peripheral areas where contamination was minimal? Yeah. Soil's great once you balance it out. These are from Zone 9, which was mostly just neglected rather than actively poisoned." Jake offered the basket. "They're safe. I've had them tested 3 times. Turns out that military-grade fertilizer runoff creates really nutrient-rich soil." One of the commission members tentatively took a tomato, scanned it with 3 different devices, and then looked at the readings like they'd personally offended him. These readings are, this tomato is healthier than organic produce from agricultural worlds." "Yeah, I was surprised too," Jake grinned. "Turns out that plants that have to survive in slightly hostile conditions develop really robust nutritional profiles. It's like they're overcompensating." Commissioner Velt pulled up her datapad and began scrolling through what Pip recognized as the original hazard assessments for Theta 9. "Mr. Torres, these reports indicate that this facility was contaminated with 17 different classes of toxic compounds, 4 types of radiation, and biological agents that were banned under 3 separate interstellar treaties." "Was contaminated." "Yeah, that's the key word. Was." Jake gestured for them to follow him into the facility. "Come on, I'll show you the remediation data. It's actually pretty cool once you get into the biochemistry of it." Pip trailed behind the delegation, recording everything, as Jake led them on a tour that progressively dismantled their understanding of environmental contamination. The radiation levels, the toxicity reports, the atmospheric composition analyses. Every single metric had improved dramatically. Some zones were now reading as safer than standard industrial sites. "How?" Commissioner Velt said finally, standing in the middle of Zone 5 where her scanner kept insisting she was in no immediate danger. "How is any of this possible? Our best remediation teams need years and specialized equipment and massive funding to accomplish what you've apparently done in less than 2 months, with a bag of fertilizer and audacity." Jake looked genuinely confused by the question. "I mean, it's just ecosystem management. You identify the problems, introduce species that solve those problems, maintain the right conditions, and let biology do its thing. Nature's really good at healing itself if you give it the right tools. But the timeline, yeah, it went faster than I expected too. I think the plants here are just super adaptive because of all the mutation pressure from the weapons testing. They're like evolution on fast forward." Jake knelt down and gently moved aside a leaf to show a cluster of smaller plants growing beneath. "See these? They're nitrogen fixers that are feeding nutrients to the hyperaccumulators, which are cleaning the soil, which lets the nitrogen fixers grow better. It's a positive feedback loop." Commissioner Velt looked at her colleagues. Her colleagues looked back. Pip recognized the expression from his own mirror. the face of someone whose professional expertise was being casually invalidated by a human with dirt under his fingernails. "We're going to need to do a full assessment," Velt said finally. "This could, if your results are replicable, this could change how we approach contaminated sites across the sector." "Sure, happy to help. Fair warning, though, I think a lot of it comes down to just paying attention to what the plants need. You can't really force remediation, you have to work with the ecosystem." Jake paused. "Also, it helps if you talk to them. I know that sounds weird, but I swear they respond better to verbal encouragement." One of the commission members made a strangled noise. Pip added to his observation log. Day 56. Subject has convinced a Galactic Agricultural Commission delegation that talking to plants is a valid scientific methodology. I have lost all remaining faith in objective reality. Day 63. The research station, because that's what everyone was calling it now, had become something of a destination. Scientists, environmental engineers, and curious visitors arrived daily to see the death garden that wasn't dead anymore. Pip had stopped trying to maintain professional observation distance and had started helping Jake with basic tasks, mostly because watching alone had become more psychologically damaging than participation. At least if he was helping, he felt like he had some control over the chaos. "Hand me that pH meter," Jake said, testing the soil in what had been the most contaminated section of Zone 5. Pip passed it over, his camera drone recording automatically. "What are the readings?" 6.8. Nearly neutral. Jake sat back on his heels, grinning. 3 months ago, this spot would have melted your exoskeleton. Now I could plant a regular earth garden here. Are you going to? Nah, I'm thinking something more interesting. There's a Corellian moss species that produces a really useful pharmaceutical compound. Needs specific conditions that I think I can create here. Jake stood up, surveying the zone with the expression of an artist contemplating a canvas. This whole facility could be a production center for rare botanical compounds. Stuff that's usually impossible to cultivate because the conditions are too extreme. You're going to turn a weapons testing site into a pharmaceutical production facility. Eventually. Yeah. Right now I'm still just figuring out what works. Jake checked his datapad. "Oh hey, I've got another tour group. Coming tomorrow. Bunch of students from the xenobotany program at Helios University. You mind sticking around to help wrangle them?" Some of the younger plants get excited when there's a crowd. Pip's antennae drooped. The plants get excited. This is my life now. I document excited plants. Hey, it beats documenting my inevitable death, right? Pip couldn't argue with that logic. His observation log for the day was brief. Day 63. Subject Torres continues to thrive. The facility continues to thrive. Everything is thriving. I am requesting reassignment on the grounds that there is nothing left to observe except success, which was not the original mission parameters. Also, I have been recruited as a tour guide assistant. This was not in my job description. The response from the Safety Council came back within hours. Observation extended indefinitely. Your documentation is being used to establish new protocols for contaminated site remediation. Congratulations on your core. Extended assignment. Pip looked at the message, looked at Jake, who was currently playing music for Gerald while adjusting a nutrient drip line, and accepted his fate. At least the tomatoes were good. Pip's official observation log. Day 90. Final report submission. I hope. Subject Jake Torres has been in residence at Theta 9 for 3 standard months. The facility has been reclassified from Level 9 Hazard Zone to Level 2 Research Station with conditional safety clearance. I have witnessed the impossible become routine. I require extended psychological leave, and possibly a new career. Perhaps something simple, like asteroid surveying. Asteroids don't talk to their rocks and make them cooperative. The final assessment day arrived with more ceremony than Pip had anticipated. Clorn had returned, apparently unable to resist witnessing the miracle that had tripled his commission. Commissioner Velt brought the full Agricultural Commission Board. A representative from the Galactic Safety Council arrived to officially review the hazard reclassification. Even a few media outlets showed up, attracted by the story of the Death Garden that had become a botanical research paradise. Jake met them all at the entrance wearing a clean shirt, which Pip noted was probably the most formal preparation the human had made for anything in 3 months. "Welcome, everyone," Jake said, gesturing broadly at the facility behind him. "Thanks for coming to what I'm calling the Theta 9 Open House. We've got tours scheduled, research data available for review, and refreshments in the Zone 3 pavilion." "Pavilion," Clorn whispered to Pip. "He built a pavilion in the Murder Vine Zone." "Gerald helped," Pip replied, his voice flat with acceptance. The vines are actually quite good at structural support once you explain what you need. Clorn's eye stalks went limp. The tour was everything Pip had come to expect from Jake Torres, which meant it was equal parts impressive. Scientific achievement and casual disregard for how reality was supposed to work. They walked through Zone 5, where the radiation levels now registered as minimal, and a diverse ecosystem of hyperaccumulator plants created a landscape that was actually objectively beautiful. Bioluminescent flowers provided natural lighting. Carefully cultivated paths wound through gardens that 3 months ago would have killed visitors in under an hour. The key was understanding that contamination isn't permanent, Jake explained to the assembled group. It's just a temporary imbalance in the ecosystem. Introduce the right corrective elements, maintain proper conditions, and nature does the heavy lifting. One of the Safety Council representatives raised a tentacle. Mr. Torres, our records indicate you accomplished in 3 months what our best remediation projections suggested would take 15 to 20 years. Can you explain the accelerated timeline? Jake shrugged. I worked really hard, and the plants here are incredibly adaptive. Plus, I think everyone was overestimating how dangerous this place actually was. Commissioner Velt made a choking sound. Overestimating. 17 people died here. Yeah, because they were testing weapons and treating the facility like a disposable laboratory. Nobody was trying to work with the ecosystem, they were fighting against it. Jake led them toward Zone 3, where Gerald and the Vine Collective had arranged themselves into decorative arches that formed a natural gateway. Once I started treating the plants like they were part of the solution instead of part of the problem, things improved pretty fast. They entered the Zone 3 pavilion, which turned out to be an actual covered seating area constructed from living vines that Gerald had woven into a stable structure. Tables made from salvaged facility materials displayed research data, sample collections, and yes, refreshments that included vegetables grown in the remediated zones. The media representatives immediately began recording everything. Clorn approached Pip, his voice low. Is this real? Tell me this is actually happening and I haven't had some kind of psychotic break. It's real, Pip confirmed. I have 90 days of documentation confirming it's real. I've had the documentation reviewed by 3 independent observers who all confirmed I'm not hallucinating. We're all just living in a universe where a single human with a gardening hobby can rehabilitate a military disaster site in 3 months. How is this possible? Pip's antennae twitched with what might have been amusement or hysteria. I've spent 3 months trying to answer that question. The best I can determine is that humans are either the luckiest species in the galaxy, or they operate on completely different laws of physics than the rest of us. The official presentations began. Jake showed remediation data that made the Safety Council representatives lean forward with interest. Commissioner Velt reviewed crop viability studies that had the Agricultural Commission muttering excitedly among themselves. The research potential alone was apparently worth billions in grants and development funding. Then came the questions. Mr. Torres, one of the media representatives asked, what made you think you could survive in a place that killed so many others? Jake considered the question while munching on a carrot he'd grown in Zone 9. Honestly, I grew up on Earth. I've dealt with invasive species, contaminated soil, pesticide runoff, and plants that were specifically engineered to resist every attempt at control. Earth gardening is basically training for extreme environmental management. But surely the danger level here was significantly higher. I mean, maybe? Jake gestured around at the thriving gardens. But humans have this stuff we used to spray on our lawns called Roundup. The corporation that made it told everyone it was completely safe. Turns out it probably causes cancer and destroys soil microbiomes and contaminates groundwater. We sprayed that stuff everywhere for decades. On our food, our gardens, places where our kids played. The assembled group went very quiet. So yeah, Jake continued. When I saw the hazard reports for this place, my first thought was, at least this contamination is honest about being dangerous. Nobody was pretending the murder vines were safe. Nobody was marketing the radiation garden as family-friendly. It was just a mess that needed cleaning up, and I've been cleaning up messes that people insisted were safe my whole life. He took another bite of carrot. Comparatively, this was easy. The plants here will tell you when they're dangerous. They scream, they attack, they glow ominously. Earth plants just smile pretty while they're soaking up poison that'll kill you 30 years later. Commissioner Velt slowly set down her datapad. You're telling us that your planet's agricultural practices were more insidious than a military weapons testing facility. I'm saying that if I can survive Earth gardening, your weapons test site was basically a vacation. At least here. When something tries to kill me, I can see it coming. Clorn leaned over to Pip again. I sold a death garden to a human who thinks it's safer than his home planet. What does that say about humans? That we should probably never visit Earth, Pip replied, and possibly that we should be very grateful they're on our side. The open house continued with increasing enthusiasm. Scientists scheduled research visits. The Agricultural Commission discussed funding for large-scale remediation projects based on Jake's methods. The Safety Council representative quietly reclassified Theta 9 as a functional research station and removed most of the hazard warnings. As the sun set over what had once been one of the most dangerous locations in the sector, Pip found Jake standing near Gerald, looking out over the gardens they'd created together. "You know they're going to want you to replicate this," Pip said. "Every contaminated site in the sector is going to want the human who fixed the unfixable." Jake grinned. "Good. I've got a lot of ideas. Plus, Gerald's been propagating really well. I think we could transport some vine cuttings to other sites. They're great at soil stabilization once they're properly socialized. Socialized murder vines. That's going to be your legacy. Could be worse." Jake watched as Gerald's vines swayed gently in the evening breeze, no longer hunting for prey but simply existing peacefully in their rehabilitated environment. "You know what the funny thing is? Everyone keeps acting like what I did here was special, but it wasn't. It was just basic environmental care, patience, and treating living things with respect instead of fear. That," Pip said quietly, "is apparently revolutionary. Then the galaxy's standards are too low." Jake stretched and headed back, toward his HAB unit, which he'd upgraded from a tent to an actual structure built into the facility. "Come on, I'm making dinner. Hope you like stir-fry, because I've got way too many vegetables again." Pip followed, his camera drone capturing one final image. A human and an alien walking through gardens that shouldn't exist, in a place that should have been a graveyard, on an evening that felt impossibly peaceful. His final observation log entry was simple. Subject Jake Torres has successfully converted Theta 9 from hazard zone to research paradise. Conclusion: humans are either crazy, brilliant, or possibly both. Recommend keeping them away from actual dangerous situations, as they will inevitably make friends with the danger and turn it into a garden. Observation complete. Observer requesting reassignment to literally anything that makes sense. P.S. The tomatoes really are excellent. 3 months later, Pip received a message from Jake. Attached was a photo of a new facility, another former military site, with a sign that read, "Theta 9 Remediation Consulting. We'll fix your death garden." Gerald had apparently established a successful cutting at the new location. Pip stared at the message, added it to his archive, and sent back a single reply. "Please stop adopting murder plants. Sincerely, someone who cares about your continued survival." Jake's response came immediately, but they're so cute once you get to know them. Pip closed the message, looked at his new assignment, a simple documentation job on a quiet archive world, and felt profound relief that he'd never have to explain another impossible human achievement. Somewhere in the galaxy, Clorn was fielding property inquiries from buyers who wanted one of those fixer-upper death gardens that humans like. The universe, Pip reflected. He was going to be very different now that humanity had joined it. Probably more gardens, definitely more confusion, and absolutely, certainly, more plants with ridiculous names doing impossible things. He could live with that.